Today I'm joined by Sebastian Bates. He runs the Warrior Academy here.
There's this term toxic masculinity that's going around so much, and I just can't stand it. We are telling young boys what they shouldn't be all the time. Whereas young girls, we are constantly saying to them, you can be this, you can be that, you should be this. Whereas with the boys, it's the complete opposite narrative. And so what I've noticed is a lot of boys feeling kind of lost. A lot of people feel like masculinity is being redefined right now. There are fundamentals that you raise both children on, right? With love and empathy and care. And you teach them these non-gendered values. Girls, they develop cognitively so much faster. Boys, in general, need so much physical activity to let off steam as they grow up. Well, they've got this excess energy, which just turns into disruption, right? Martial arts takes that energy and then controls it and turns it into discipline. Schools are very much designed for women, and boys kind of feel lost in that. When you have kids, you stop living for yourself. You start living unselfishly.
Today I'm joined by Sebastian Bates. He runs the Warrior Academy here. He lives in Dubai. He has got a phenomenal charity as well, foundation that he also runs, we're going to delve into. He's got a fascinating background in terms of a business career, great father, and this is going to be a very exciting conversation. And I've had to stop asking a lot of things before the podcast because I wanted to do them on camera because this is going to be very good. Firstly, thank you for your time today. With everything you've achieved, done, and kind of built throughout your business development, what do you think is the most surprising part of the story to kind of where you are now? You've got how many units in terms of Warrior Academy?
So we've got 5 full-time academies across 2 continents, Europe and the Middle East, so Asia, and about 20 commercial units. Okay. So a lot of these academies are, 3 to 5 units stuck together.
And within Warrior Academy, what's the main thing to give people background in terms of specific to what you do? Obviously, I know that, but to kind of give some insight and in terms of how that started.
Yeah, sure. So the Warrior Academy has a very unique approach to developing the character of young kids. So rewind back to where this all started for me, right? I grew up in the UK, in the countryside in the UK. My dad was in the army, mum was in the NHS. I never had any entrepreneurial influence in my life. I was bullied quite badly in school when I was younger, found martial arts, developed loads of confidence through martial arts. It kind of saved me through some massive transitions, changing school a lot with an army family, bullying, and so on. Eventually, I found myself through the kind of university treadmill. I left uni after 1 year in Denmark, started traveling around the world, fighting in Thailand on Thai boxing camps for a long time, came back to the UK, started a Thai boxing club in a inner city gym in the UK. And there were a group of about 20 young men, I would say, 16 to 18 year olds. And they were going through some really difficult transitions, just like I was when I was younger. But they were even more severe. A lot of them were sleeping rough sometimes. There was drugs, there was alcohol, there were social issues. They were being kicked out of their home by their parents, getting in fights all the time. What I noticed after working with them for a year is this massive shift in their character. And so, they wouldn't just walk into the dojo, kick their shoes off and start a fight with someone in there. They would walk in, bow while they enter, call each other sir. They would have more respect. A lot of that meant that I had to meet them where they were at. So I had to get involved with the hard sparring, the training with them and earn their respect. But after a year, we had 15 national champions. And the biggest light bulb moment for me was this wasn't just a development of their martial arts technique. We were developing their character. We were giving them a moral compass. And so the Warrior Academy started after that club when I went to a village hall in the village I'd grown up with in Somerset. We had 20 kids out of the 100 kids in the primary school sign up. And yeah, from that point, the Warrior Academy grew and grew to where we are now today, with the largest martial arts academy in the Middle East. We teach over 2,000 kids every single week here in the UAE, and we sponsor close to 5,000 kids in developing countries every single week through the exact same program.
You mentioned something very fascinating there about kind of like lost young men. Do you think that's something you think has kind of gotten worse over the last few years?
I think young men don't have a social contract anymore. They don't really know where they stand. I think there's this term toxic masculinity that's going around so much, and I just can't stand it. For me, we are telling young boys what they shouldn't be all the time. They shouldn't be this, they shouldn't be that. We're kind of telling them what they shouldn't be and not giving them an aspiration to grow into. Whereas young girls, we are constantly saying to them, you can be this, you can be that, you should be this. Whereas with the boys, it's the complete opposite narrative. And so what I've noticed is a lot of boys feeling kind of lost. On one hand, they're told to be softer and more feminine. On the other hand, they're told to be, to kind of be more masculine and be tougher. And so they're kind of lost somewhere in between. I think that a lot of people feel like masculinity is being redefined right now. But I also feel like boys and girls are very, very different from a very young age. I've got boys and girls, I'm raising in my house, and I've worked with 50,000 families around the world for the last 15 years. So I see the difference in their development from a young age, biologically, hormonally, neurologically. From a very young age, they develop differently.
So one of the things I see, which is a big issue, is that almost they're trying to treat the both the same.
Yeah.
But like men are men, women are women. It kind of is what it is. And I think that's where they're trying to blank statement everything, and it kind of doesn't work. And then that's why I think a lot of men end up becoming lost. And I don't know if you believe in this as well, but I think I can see a big cultural difference between the US, where I spend quite a time, versus kind of Europe, in terms of, even if you look at like the political figures, in terms of masculinity compared to like Europe.
Yeah. Yeah, and also the US is massive, right? So there are different areas of the US which would have completely different...
Yeah, 100%.
Where have you been in the US?
Texas, California, New York, Florida. I've been in Vegas a lot recently.
So California and Texas, they must have...
massively different.
Right. And so I can imagine Texas kind of being more traditional, more old school, whereas California more kind of left wing.
But even within California itself, it depends where you go. Right. So like if you go to the very wealthy areas, it's a certain demographic. If you go to LA itself, it's a very different demographic.
Yeah. It's interesting because, if you ask me when I first had kids, would I raise my son and daughter the same? I would say yes, absolutely, right? Now I'd say no. Because I know that they will have different lives. My son's going to have a very different life to my daughter. There are fundamentals that you raise both children on, right? With love and empathy and care, and you teach them these values which are their non-gendered values. But then you've got to understand that girls, they develop cognitively so much faster. Boys in general need so much physical activity to let off steam as they grow up, or they've got this excess energy which just turns into disruption, right? If we look at boys, we tell them to sit still, don't act out, all this sort of stuff in class. And I feel like schools are very much, they're very much designed for women and for girls, and boys kind of feel lost in that. And there's something like, I've got the stats somewhere, but there's something like 4 or 5 times more likely boys to drop out of school. They're far more likely to experience bullying. Their lives are far more physical. They get tested physically and challenged physically by their peers from a young age. They're something like 2 or 3 times more likely to find themselves in special education classes. They get far less A grades than girls. Now the rate of boys going to university is far less than girls. So, we look at young men and we believe they've got this massive advantage in society, right? But I look at the first 15 to 20 years of a young boy's life, and it's really hard to see that. So yeah, boys and girls live very different lives. And I think the solution there is to really focus on values that are non-gendered from a very young age, but then to listen very carefully and don't be so terrified of generalizing. I feel like the whole world is so terrified of generalizing that we white canvas gender entirely, right? It's like everyone's neutral, which just isn't the case. Look at the evidence. It's not the case.
Yeah.
Quick interjection. 90% of fitness coaches never actually scale their business and get the time freedom, location freedom, and financial freedom they want. Not because they're not good coaches, but because they're missing the systematic approach to scaling their business. And I've been there. I was trapped in a job working 60 hours a week, making £3,000 a month, trading time for money, like everyone else. Now today, our 7-figure scaling system program has helped over 500 coaches scale their business systematically. Hitting the first 5K a month, 10K a month, 50K a month, 100, 200, 300K a month. The difference, we actually help you by plugging in and playing the exact systems we use in our own fitness business to help you get the exact same results. So if you want to get out of being in that feast and famine cycle with your business and with your mindset, we're offering free strategy calls where we'll actually audit your entire business. If you want us to walk through exactly what the bottlenecks are, where you're stuck, and how you can fix them, hit the link below the podcast. You can book in the call and we'll help you take your business to the next level if we think you're a good fit. Either way, we'll just give you a ton of value. Now back to the podcast.
It's just the facts. And I think what's really interesting based upon kind of what you said there with how boys need to kind of be kept active is in terms of you look from a development standpoint, the traits that they'll learn from martial arts then apply to everything else in life, like consistency, hard work, discipline, doing things when you don't feel like it. Like all these things then correlate into other things, which like I think in school, kids get bored, sit in classroom learning about things they don't want to learn about from someone who hasn't actually done the thing they want to do.
Yeah.
Because I remember like in my own, when I was at school, I didn't do particularly well because I got bored and I was like, this is kind of pointless. I just want to go and like do actual stuff. Or like I like learn from doing things rather than theory. And I also think as kids get older, they also they know how the world works. So if you've got a business teacher who's teaching you business and then like, dude, you don't have a business, it kind of comes fundamentally flawed. But I also think there's an interesting narrative now where I think conventional education is going to get challenged very heavily because the ability for even information for free on the internet, you've got things like AI to teach people. There's AI schools in the US kind of coming out. How are you a big believer in terms of traditional education now, or do you think that needs a big change?
I think when you look at, when I look at my kids, right, and I'm like, people talk about legacy and what you want to leave your kids. I think the most important thing you can leave your kids is an education. It's the things that stand the test of time. You know, it's like the Bruce Lee quote, which I'll probably ruin right now, but it's something along the lines of, it's not what you know, don't give your kids everything you never had, teach them everything you were never taught. And I think the things that, especially in a disruptive time where we don't know, what should we teach kids? You know, we don't know if we should teach them loads of AI stuff and focus on that, or should we change the academic syllabus, or, you know, I think that the things you should be focusing on primarily as a parent are the things that stand the test of time. And those things are values and traits and character. The most important thing that we should be focused on within the educational system is the development of character in young people. It's not necessarily a specific subject. It's developing their character, because these human beings are going to grow up and control AI, hopefully, not the other way around, right? And so you want those human beings to be in a position where they're doing it from a place of moral conduct, where they've got a moral compass. What we don't need is more educated leaders. We need leaders with a black belt character.
You mentioned then character, and you went from building your business to being in a village hall to being in Dubai. That's obviously taken a lot of character to do. What was the catalyst in terms of the big shift that drove that increase in terms of growth?
I think as you grow a business, I've been growing this business now 15 years. So there have been so many levels and layers of growing that business where I've reached a glass ceiling. And, you know, different years have had different glass ceilings. So one of the first issues we had was geographically, right? It was like we couldn't grow the business more than the rural area of England. It was like we were kind of stuck after that point. And so when we made the big jump to the UAE, that was smashing through that glass ceiling, and we tripled the business in 1 year. Then we had a new issue, right? Which was we were working directly in schools, and so our product kind of looked like an after-school club, but we felt like it was more powerful, so we needed our own space. So we had a market-fit glass ceiling, and we had to break through. As soon as we broke through that, within 1 year, we tripled in size. Then the next glass ceiling would have been a cultural issue, where we were onboarding loads of new instructors because we were growing so quickly. We onboarded some of the wrong people. We had some toxic employees in our team. When you go from 5 to close to 50 over a 3-year period, it just changes everything, right? So there's a cultural glass ceiling that changes, which you need to break through. And so when I look back, all these different stages, they needed a whole different mindset. They needed a different experience and character to break through, right?
I'd have 2 questions to that. One was, how long do you think was the longest period you were at a glass ceiling? And 2, what was kind of like the biggest identity shift amongst those kind of levels?
Yeah, so the biggest glass ceiling would have been geographical, because I think sometimes the first glass ceiling is the hardest until you start seeing the pattern. Once you notice the pattern, you're like, this is a glass ceiling. You got to sit with a problem long enough, and then you don't just give up. A lot of people, they reach a glass ceiling, they get bored, and they go and do something else. They're like, I'm going to start another business. Do you know what I mean? It's so typical.
That's when you said 15 years to me. That just reaffirmed in my head again straight away. I was like,
yeah, it wasn't 15 years of one glass ceiling, but yeah, it's funny. It's funny, isn't it? Because I just see it all the time with beginner entrepreneurs. And we've all been there, those who've been doing business for a long time. You get to a problem, you try and solve it for a bit, and then you just start something else because you want novelty. The same thing that made you create, a new product or service out of nowhere, bring it to the marketplace, have the courage to face, rejection and uncertainty, and that creativity which you felt got you there. You now need to be the sort of person who can sit with a boring problem for long enough to actually solve it and get the right advice. So to answer your question, the longest one was geographically. We were stuck in the UK. It was the biggest jump, right, to go to a different country. At the same time, I was actually an extreme sports athlete doing 500 base jumps around the world. I dropped from a wingsuit, 50 foot, broke everything from my waist down. Was told I could never walk again. Took 2 years to learn to walk again. So I had to sneak that as an extra glass ceiling outside of the business into it. So that slowed me down to a degree. And then it was kind of like a catalyst to really accelerate what I was doing.
You mentioned there as well, learning within that process to get through the glass ceiling. And I think about this all the time is it's so easy to get distracted with novelty rather than the boredom of just trying to fix the problem because there is a way to kind of fix it. What's been your process to kind of chip through that glass ceiling over the years?
It's funny, you know Dan Priestley, don't you?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Dan once said to me, don't let your boredom destroy your business. And it just hit me and stayed with me so long. That is the chasing the novelty thing, right? Especially with high energy entrepreneurs who are just like about implementation and action. You get to a point, you're like, I need to change, I need to sort something out, we need to do something different. My strategy around that is finding people who have done it before. So finding people who have basically got from A to B through that challenge that I've not done, get their advice. But also I think it's really important that you just look at entrepreneurship like a career. If you try and race through it too quickly, you end up just picking up these kind of novel ideas, but never cementing the assets you need to actually develop, an asset-rich, proper business. It's very easy to jump on fads and to create something which gets attention, but doesn't actually stand the test of time. So for me, it's about finding long-term solutions to the problems, finding the right people, and never being afraid of actually letting go. I think, a big part of life in general, but especially entrepreneurship, is actually this process of learning to let go. One of the biggest glass ceilings that entrepreneurs face is not outsourcing quick enough. Right. So, and you've probably seen this with a lot of your clients. They get to that stage where they're like, okay, I'm doing everything right now. And when you're an entrepreneur and you're not making much money and you've got a very small team, if that, maybe a part-time person, it's very, very difficult for you to actually let go. Because as soon as you do, you feel like they're going to do a worse job than you. And so you're in that trap of, you reach the glass ceiling, typically around £300,000 a year. That seems to be the glass ceiling before they learn to let go of tasks, right? At that point, people don't do it. It stunts their growth. I feel like that accident I had with base jumping forced me to let go. I realized that I couldn't stand on my feet and do 25 classes a week and grow the business. The business would always fall on me. And so I had to very, very quickly learn to let go and let other people teach. From that point onwards, it's been a case of I've been very good at finding talented people, giving them the keys to the car and just inspiring them to do a great job and stepping back and giving them the space and not micromanaging.
One of the things I'm a big believer in is you can have control, you can have growth, you can't have both. And you said something there, and it was like me to a T maybe like 3 years ago, is almost like the ADHD autism entrepreneur who just wants to go all gun blazing and do everything. And I've had to like try and unlearn and like box in that kind of personality character trait, because I realized that was the thing that was causing the problem, because I was constantly distracted and like steering the ship, like changing course every like 3 days because I'd get a new idea that I wouldn't try and do. But what I think is difficult for people to unlearn is that is the thing that made you successful at the beginning. So you have a cognitive bias that's the behavior that will then get you to the next level. Yeah. But it's actually unlearning that skill and learning the new skill of like patience and kind of dealing with the boredom and just sitting there and fixing the problem to then go to the next level up.
You need one sensei. You need one sensei, one blueprint. Everyone starts a course, and you see it with course junkies all the time, right? They start a course and then they do the next course. And before you know it, they're spending, a huge amount of their profit every year. Some of them even getting into massive debt in order to do the course. What they really need to do is sit with one mentor, because everything works, right? It's just you haven't sat with it long enough. Sit with one mentor, listen to everything they're saying, and implement like crazy. Everything they say, implement it. It obviously works. What slows us down is that kind of distraction, starting something new. And it's so typical with education. People love to read books. And what I've noticed is sometimes the people who read the most aren't actually progressing the fastest. If you just read 3 books and did everything in those books, you'd probably get there much faster.
I think it's one of the best sayings. I can't remember who it was I heard, but it's basically like, just get the 10 best books on all the subjects and just keep rereading them. Which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
You've had Dan Priestley obviously give you a lot of advice in terms of your business. What's the biggest things he's helped you with in terms of kind of like move the needle?
Dan's got a very different character to me. I'm super high energy, ADHD. I've got a very strong risk profile, right? I'm very happy to take risks. Dan's always been kind of the mentor for me to kind of give me a sense check and a logic check of what I'm doing. But he's also been there to be very, to challenge me to kind of think bigger a lot of the time, right? It's hard for me to say one thing that he's encouraged me to do. But I think there are certain times. I remember sitting down with Dan once and saying to him, it was a mentor session. I came to him and I was like, here's what I want to talk about. And it was like HR problem. And he was like, why are you coming to me with this? What's the point of all this? This is easy HR stuff. I'm not here to talk about, simple problems, about, issues that some of the team might have. Let's talk about big picture stuff. And so one of the things that I learned from Dan is, if you are lucky enough to have the time with someone who's really experienced, ask good questions. Come prepared, ask good questions, because you don't want to be spending money, turning up and asking stupid questions, right? So that was one of the biggest insights from me was valuing a mentor's time so that you can benefit more.
That's a good reframe. And where, like, within what you kind of learned from him, and also the thought process with how he thinks of trying to slow you down, how long did that take you to try and balance out in that aspect? Has that taken you a while to kind of change it over the years, or have you taken like the base jumping Seb and then kind of split personality in terms of different parts of your life?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like martial arts has helped me massively. Martial arts takes that energy and then controls it and turns it into discipline. I think that some of the beautiful things about ADHD is this ridiculous ability to focus on one thing for hours and hours and hours, where other people get bored very easily, right? It's also very easy for someone with ADHD to find out exactly what they're interested in, because everything else seems slow, and that one thing you just got a disgusting work ethic with, right? So yeah, I guess for me, it's always been a balance between the martial arts bringing the discipline into my life to give me the idea that I can focus on something for long enough. But then again, a lot of people, they just don't have the risk profile to actually take the leap. And so this is the other thing. I think with ADHD, people look at risk differently. They're literally neurologically designed to take more risk because they just don't see it as risk as much. And so, I've mentored about 600 business owners. Before I knew I had ADHD, I was mentoring so many business owners, and I couldn't understand why they how they saw risk. Why did they see risk different to me? And I suppose on that journey, I've learned how to mentor people to take the same amount of risk, and a lot of it comes down to perspective. And there's certain little techniques and stuff I've used them, which have really, really helped. You
mentioned obviously you've worked with over 600 people, and then you also weren't thinking big enough in your own business. What specifically did you reframe in terms of having a bigger vision for like what you're doing? Because obviously you do charity work now, you've got a huge business in itself. Like, was that a gradual process, or was there like a defining moment where you suddenly thought like, I can take this way bigger than I thought?
Yeah, I think I suppose 10 years ago, maybe 7-8 years ago, I was sat there and I was thinking, people would ask me for a 5-year vision or 10-year vision. I couldn't think more than a year ahead, because for me, everything just kind of, it felt unrealistic, or I couldn't think of something exciting enough. If you asked me for a big vision for my life, I'd be like, well, You know, I don't know. It doesn't seem exciting enough. And no matter what I came up with, either felt unrealistic or not exciting enough. Then I asked myself the question, what game could I see myself playing for 100 years? 100 years time, if I live that long, right? The kind of 100 years, 80 years, whatever. If I get to that old age and I look back and I'd be like, that was a game worth playing. I'd be happy I played that game. I dedicated my life to that game. I think once I made that shift, it became so much easier to then plan. And then I would say with the planning, you know, it's classic. People really overestimate what they can do short term and underestimate what they can do long term. And then being in the game long enough actually shows you that. It's easy for someone to say that, right? Like, you know, your short term plan is too big, but your long term plan is too small. But until you spend 10 years, 15 years, 20 years doing it, you don't actually see it play out. Now I look back, I join up the dots. And it's just crazy, right? How we've grown and developed, and you know, you can literally see the glass ceilings I was mentioning, right? It's also funny the glass ceilings are tied to each time I had a child, because I remember when you were telling me, I was like, you know, every child brings their own wealth to you in whatever form that is, and you know, for me, I can literally look at our business growth and be like, that child, because it gives you that energy. So yeah, that's I guess it's a case of perspective and experience, and being able to look back and join all the dots then makes the next 15, 20 years seem like, okay, while that seems like a massive goal, that's actually realistic.
So if you started your business in 2010, this is 15 years ago.
Yep, 2010.
Okay, so you've been through the whole growth of social media and then paid advertising come in, and then we're now going into kind of like the AI age.
Yeah.
In my opinion, this kind of shift now feels like social media when it first happened, in terms of like there's this new thing that no one quite knows how it's going to kind of work or kind of play out, but it's definitely going to give people a massive advantage to the people who use it. How are you using that heavily in your business already? And obviously know that's something Dan's all over at the moment.
Yeah, so you know, I think that we were very quick to adopt things within our business with AI. You know, we've literally just come off an AI challenge. We provide every single person in our business with a premium subscription to ChatGPT, not just for their business, but for their personal life. My view on that is if they get good at using it in their personal life, everything within their work will start to be more fluid. AI is like a language, I think. And so, you know, you start to use it in everything you do, it just becomes normal. It's how I work, it's how I live, it's what I do for my hobbies and everything. So, you know, we started with our leadership team, about 5 or 6 people on the team, you know, COO, CMO, CTO, all this sort of stuff. And we said, right, this is every week you gotta show us how you're using it in your personal life and how you're using it in your business life. And then we had this massive challenge, and it was great. And now they go off and then do that with all their departments, right? So there's 10, 15 in each department, whatever. They then have the same challenge. So AI just becomes this language that's just in the business. Fundamentally, it's what we all use. We've then used that to develop our product, to analyze things, mostly analytical, obviously to speed up communication with social media, automations, that sort of stuff. But in particular, how we analyze the soft skill development of kids, how we provide feedback, how we plan journeys, all that sort of stuff. I think AI, you know, when it first came out, I feel like a lot of people were obsessing over it, but it wasn't ready for it. Do you know what I mean? They were spending so much time on it, but nothing was really working very well. I think sometimes with these things, it's worth just kind of stepping back a bit, waiting for something to really click, and then doubling down on that. It's very easy to get distracted, and it's one of those other things where it's like, okay, now everything is about AI, that's all you do, but now your foot's off the gas with everything else you're doing. So it's hard to kind of find a balance, you know?
My opinion for people is, like, my goal with it is to know enough to be dangerous but not be an expert, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So like I can very easily get pulled down rabbit holes if I learned how to like vibe code and start building software, and I started fanning around building stuff, and I was like, this is a waste of time.
Why am I here?
I know how it works now, that's cool,
yeah.
I'm out. Like to understand the concept of it.
And then finding people who are better at AI than you.
And literally just found someone. So it's like,
yeah.
But now I can also speak his language and understand how the thing works to like a basic degree. It's the same thing I try and explain to people when it comes to like running paid advertising. And I know you do a lot with paid ads because your ads are sick and you sent me some of them. Is that people try and delegate things they don't understand. So then like you almost try and talk different languages, because if you don't understand paid ads and CPM, CTR, frequency scores, you're like, you can't almost manage, say, like, for example, a media buyer. And I think people need to understand the basics, but you don't need to be an expert in everything.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that's one of the beautiful things as well about growing a business, right? Like we're approaching 8 figures now. And I think when you get to that stage and you've got quite a big team, the really cool position I'm in now is we can afford really talented people. And it's a dream for an entrepreneur because, for so long in your business, you're doing everything. You can't afford a master of meta ads or, of paid search or whatever. You can't necessarily afford that amazing, tech developer, whatever. It's so, to then be in that position where you can, sometimes I'm hiring people and I'm learning so much from them, which is really cool. But exactly what you said, you need to have enough awareness and understanding to actually be able to hold a conversation in the room. Otherwise, everything slows down or you feel like you're losing touch.
So where I see a lot of people get stuck in businesses generally is like, Hormozy calls it the swamp, like the 3 to 5 million kind of range. How did you pull yourself from that into the next grade? Because for context, people, the reason why most people get stuck in that area is that your business is a lot of size, a lot of things kind of going on, but you don't have enough money, as you said, to kind of pay people like 200-300 grand a year who are like world class at what they do.
Yeah, I think there is a shift that happens when you go from making 3 to 5 million to kind of 8 to 9 million US, where you typically go from a team of 20 to a team of about 70, 80, right? And during that transition, I think some really cool things happen. The first is you actually experience more freedom. When you get to that 2 to 3 million point or 3 to 4 million point with 30 staff, you lose freedom, right? Because now the business becomes hungry. It needs more. You've got to invest in a leadership team. Dan calls this, going from a lifestyle to performance business, crossing the desert. And it literally feels like a desert. You have HR problems, cultural problems, tech problems. You suddenly need a massive financial buffer because the business costs shoot up to several $100,000 a month, right? And so you go through this transition. Out the other side is freedom. But at that stage, if you imagine you've got 20 or 30 in the team, if there's an HR issue or you lose someone really important, either you're back on the tools or you have to quickly try and hire someone. Once you've got 70 to 80 people on the team, you're making $8 or $9 million a year. The reality there is the team then goes and finds someone else without you even knowing about it. They've been replaced. And so there's less of a headache. That comes with other challenges, right? Other challenges being you might feel a bit out of touch with your own business. What do you do? I kind of see it the same way as raising a child. So, raising a business or growing a business, growing a child, kind of similar. If you think about when you're a startup, you've just given birth to a child, right? Maybe not you, your wife. And so you've got this fragile little thing and your job is to try and keep it alive. That is your idea as an entrepreneur. You've just created this brand new business and you're like, how am I going to, get this business alive? How am I going to, keep it alive, keep it going, feed it, give it everything it needs? You're learning on the job, doing every single task around you. Same with the business, same with the child. Then they get to a point where you move from caregiver to mentor. Your business goes into the teenage stage, adolescence, right? Your business is now being influenced by more people than just you and your wife or your small team or whatever, right? So your business now has heads of department who have their own thoughts and ideas, and you leave them with a level of autonomy to actually do that and not micromanage. Your child is a teenager. They start hanging out with their friends. They want to be with their friends more than you. And so the reality there is you transition to this stage as a business owner where your role actually is to be the moral compass to your business and say, this is the vision, this is the purpose, this is what we stand for, this is the direction we're going. And so that's a really, it can be quite a difficult time for entrepreneurs because they kind of lose their place. But it's a really exciting time because you transition from business owner to investor. And now you see your business as enterprise value rather than just operational. And so you can start looking at doing acquisitions and deals and that sort of stuff if you carry on past that route. So that's the kind of stage I'm in now, which is really exciting because we're looking at everything around us differently. And it's true what they say. There's no competitors for the people at the top. Not that we're at the top at all, but there's no competitors up there. People, they just see them as, potential partnerships, collaborations. And so the way that you look at business is very, very different.
That's such a good analogy in terms of explaining that because it goes beautifully together. And I can personally kind of testify to that throughout my own career. I think it's interesting in terms of how things develop. And also I think this is where, when you look back on things, it's easier. You can probably remember specific things people have said to you, like that now makes sense. Yeah. But at the time, I remember like a few years ago, people were like, "Oh, team culture is really important." I was like, and like life experience, I was like, "I don't fucking mean anything." Like,
it's only important when you realize you need to invest in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was my own ignorance at the time, is that I didn't understand the value of that or the impact of that would have.
Yeah, and I don't think, I think that's the beauty of entrepreneurship, right? You learn on the job. That's the beauty of parenting. You learn on the job. There's no perfect way to do everything, and you'll grow and develop your business in your unique way, just as will I, as will someone else. And I think when you grow a child, you look for amazing mentors for them. Right? Like I grew up, I had amazing mentors. I had a martial arts instructor who helped me through bullying. And I think that when you grow your business, you do the same thing, but they don't have to be mentors for you. They could be people you actually hire. Like we had an amazing operations manager who joined us and taught me loads about team culture. We've had an amazing CMO join us and help us develop this entire ecosystem for, onboarding customers long term. And, it's just that, I think just stepping back and realizing you don't just do it alone. Entrepreneurship really is a team sport.
What do you think is the biggest mistake, or if you could go back and tweak something as you were growing the business, you would change?
Good question. If I could go back and change something, I would have removed people quicker. And I know that sounds brutal, but I'd let the wrong people stay too long through my inexperience. I brought on this incredible head of operations. He got rid of 8 people in 1 week when he joined. It was the most brutal week of my life, I think, because I was like, whoa. But we had this cultural issue within the business, and you needed a fresh pair of eyes on it. And he came in, I was trying to solve it with everything, perks and benefits and improving things and pay rises. And he came in, identified all the toxic individuals and just removed, and the business doubled within a year. And the feeling was, it was like a relief that this weight we'd been carrying for months. And it was just such a nice place to work for everyone within a few weeks. So yeah, I mean, you can't go back and change those things because they're so important for you to learn. And you need that weight, that heaviness to actually learn the lesson and let it embed.
2 questions off the back of that. So one is, what are the character traits in people of those people who you end up getting rid of that you didn't want? And second is, how do you now hire upon knowing that information?
So one of the things you've got to be careful of when you grow a business quickly and you go through like a very fast growth stage is you're in this position where you see someone, they seem great, you're like, right, get in the team, we need you, right? So the biggest mistake I would make there is not doing enough due diligence. And to be very practical with this advice, get references and phone them all up. A 10-minute conversation, with some of these individuals, a 10-minute conversation would have saved me a huge amount of heartache and mental stress, because I'm sure their previous employers would have just said, here's where they're good, here's where they're not so good, and that would have helped us a lot. I think we now have a very organized and systemized process for onboarding, which highlights potential issues way before it happens. We didn't have that before. The training is very, very good now. The ongoing training, the professional development is very good. So we can see weak points and we can help them before things get worse. And the other thing is we treat, hiring like we treat marketing. So for us, recruitment is marketing, and we have a waiting list of people who want to join us. So the great thing about running the Warrior Academy now and being the largest academy in the Middle East is we've got 20 or 30 instructors who are, applying to join us every single month. And so now we don't just look from the UK, we look from around the world for the best instructors and the best mentors. And then we can handpick people for specific roles that we know would be brilliant. And so I think it's difficult to kind of do that when you're a startup, right? But if you've got 15 plus employees, building that kind of waiting list with people who could join you is really, really valuable.
Your team all works in person. You've obviously coached a lot of people, business owners. The majority of people who listen to this will probably have remote businesses where most of their team work offline. I used to work in a real estate business, estate agency, so I was used to being with people in person. If I could flip it and have everyone in one place in an office, I would actually do that, because I think it'd be way better and you'd get way more done and have a better working environment. What would be your advice in terms of for people who have maybe a remote business in terms of building maybe a culture? I
think that nowadays more than ever, you need to you need to build something where people aren't just turning up to get paid. My view is that people, a business should exist for reasons beyond just making money. We focus so much on P&L, profit and loss. We look at the revenue, we look at the costs, that business is successful or not, but we don't actually measure impact. And I think that if you as a business made that one of your core metrics, that we literally measure our impact in the world, that is something that would drive your team, because your employees might turn up and they love the fact that business is growing and they might get a pay rise. But what they would talk about to their friends is, my business is doing this in the world. My business is changing lives. The business I work for. And you can hear the shift. I remember when we started the charity and started doing all this philanthropic work, the way that our team would speak about our business went from they do this and they do that to we do this. We are doing this in Africa. We are doing this in Nepal. Rather than they at the Warrior Academy are doing this, right? It was like, we are now this cemented team with this really strong culture around why we exist. So one of the most powerful ways, I wouldn't call it a hack, but a way that you can really inspire your team remotely around the world is to unify them for a reason beyond making money.
Let's talk about the charity and the foundation work you do. How did you first start that?
So people ask me this sometimes, where does the charity thing come in? And only people, I think, from England actually get this, right? When you grew up in England,
Yeah.
When you grew up in England, you do little things for charity as a kid all the time. Do you remember little fun runs you might do, and you'd go around the street, knock on the door, and get 50p for a 10-minute run or something? And all these little things are kind of built into our culture. And I never really realized that until I met so many cultures around the world where this wasn't the case, and they just didn't really have that same experience growing up. So I think charity and community and raising money for charity is something that I grew up with, and so that then trickled into what we did as I grew the business. We would do we started donating. Every time we had a transaction go through the business, we would make a small donation through something called B1 G1, buy one give one. And it was great because we could actually track the growth of the business to the impact we were making globally. It was really great, really systemized, and it's a really beautiful concept from the company who do it. And we were giving 365 days of life-saving clean water to kids in Africa when someone signed up for an annual membership or this sort of stuff. And it got to the point where I felt like this was amazing, we were making an impact, but it felt a bit distant from me. I wasn't there seeing the kids, get this charity donation. I wasn't there watching the kids in India get this education, I wasn't there to witness the bicycles in Cambodia we were giving out or donating towards. And I realized that we had something quite special we could actually give to our customers. What we decided to do was to give 10% of our spaces in our clubs to kids on scholarships. We didn't have the money to donate to charity in large amounts. We had this big vision where we wanted to sponsor 10,000 kids every single week. That was about 7-8 years ago. We decided to do that. And when I thought of that idea, there was no way in my mind that I could possibly afford it. It felt, like I was saying earlier, it felt too big. Didn't quite feel real. So we started giving out free scholarships, to those who had been referred to us by welfare officers, to children who were referred to us from a children's hospice, so the siblings of kids who were terminally ill. We partnered with the armed forces, so we were mentoring kids when their parents would go away for 6 months. All this sort of stuff. It started making a massive impact. We had parents writing into us saying, we had literally changed their child's life. We had one parent write into us to say we had saved their child's life who was suicidal. We transitioned kids through bullying, especially with the children's hospice. We help kids overcome tragedies like losing loved ones, all this sort of stuff. And when we moved to Dubai, we wanted that same giving culture in what we were doing. In the UK, when we did it, we never made it public. It was just an internal thing we did with the team because we didn't want to be bombarded with everyone trying to, get a spot on a scholarship placement. In the UAE, we didn't really feel like there was a huge demand from the affluent families for free membership. So we thought, what if we could take this concept of a scholarship and give it or take it and provide it to the most vulnerable children in the world. And so that's in the biggest slums on the planet, right? And so I took a flight to Kenya and I went to a homeless shelter in Thika, which is near Nairobi. And I sat there with 30 boys who had literally been saved off the street in the last 3 to 6 months. And, these boys are 7 to 9 year olds. They're covered in scars and scratches and bruises. They're wearing their one pair of clothes. They're addicted to drugs, alcohol. They've been sniffing glue for a long time because of the pain of hunger. And that numbs the pain of hunger. They're in this horrible position. And I remember, sitting there as a dad, some of these kids were similar age to my kids, and just feeling overwhelmed with this idea of how can I possibly help them? The problem's too big to actually make a dent here. Until I gave one boy a uniform. And, I gave him this uniform. The boy's name was Jeremy. Gave him a uniform. And I saw his face light up. And he literally became a martial artist. And he hadn't smiled at all throughout that. But he did a great job of teaching the class. So he earned a uniform. And when he put on this uniform, kids have amazing imaginations, right? In his mind, he was now a martial artist. He was just like the black belt instructors at the front. And so it was so cool to see. And the realization, the light bulb moment I had in that point was, these kids do get a shot. They get transitioned from the street. They're lucky enough to be found on the street. They get transitioned into a homeless shelter where they get 1 or 2 meals a day. They get clothes. They get, medical care. They get taken off drugs and addiction. And they do get put into full-time education. Most of them don't make it out. They end up going back on the streets, right? So after 6 months in full-time education, they're back on the streets because they're running away from authority. So they get their shot. The issue is they make the wrong decisions. And so throughout my career in martial arts, despite having this imposter syndrome of how can I make an impact here? I'm just a martial arts instructor. I realized that the one thing that could actually influence them on their journey in life was the decisions they make. And what influences our decisions in life is our character. And so if I could just develop their character, I know they would have a much, much better chance of succeeding after the homeless shelter. And so basically from that point, we transitioned 10 or 11 different groups through this homeless shelter into full-time education. They stuck at it. They stayed. And now, that's developed from that one little club with 30 kids to close to 5,000 vulnerable children in about 5 or 6 different countries. We're in the biggest slum in Africa, or third biggest slum in Africa, Kibera slum. We're in the Himalayas, the foothills of Everest in Nepal. We're in villages in Fiji. We're in the favelas of Rio. We're literally all over the world with this one concept. So we're in about 5 continents now.
Have you taken your kids to see any of this?
Not yet. I think there's a time and place for it, and I think they need a level of maturity. The first thing I would say to parents, I get asked this all the time, can I take my kids to see this, to see the kids in the slums? The first thing I would say is kids are kids wherever you go, right? And my kids are quite well traveled. We spend about 3 or 4 months a year traveling. I'll give you an example of how kids are kids. We were in Thailand the other month. We normally go for a month in the spring. And, we were traveling across Thailand, and we pulled over the side of the road, and my kids, jumped out of the car, and we went to get some food, just some like street food. And they went around the back of where the street food was being sold, and they saw these kids, and these kids had nothing at all. There was a little hammock in the back, and there was rubbish everywhere. And there was a bit of a shop where they were selling some stuff. And, for me, I was like, oh, my kids maybe haven't seen this level of poverty before. My daughter said to me, she said, where's their house? And I said, this is the house. And my son was like, they haven't got a roof. And I was like, some people don't have roofs, And then my daughter looked at them and said, oh, it's not fair. They've got a hammock, And so kids are so innocent. They just see things as they are. It's us as adults who place that kind of judgment and the difference on them. Would I take my kids into the heart of some of the most dangerous slums on the planet? No, right? I've taken. I was there in Kibera slum with 20 of our patrons and our team. We had to have armed security with assault rifles following us through because we're a target, right? Like
where's Kibera?
Kibera slum is in Nairobi.
Okay.
So you got 2 or 3 million people living there, very close conditions, crime rate very, very high. The conditions there are, in some of the areas, are just so desperate. And so it was a huge mind opening shock for a lot of people who've never seen anything like that. Would I take my kids there? No. When they're teenagers, yes, absolutely, right? There's a certain time and place for it. I think that, my kids in particular, they are growing up in a house where entrepreneurship is balanced with philanthropy. And so they see the videos and the pictures and they ask questions and they learn all the time, right? I've even done video calls with kids in an orphanage in Kenya with my kids back home, and it's been quite good fun. They understand it's normal to grow a business and build a charity at the same time. That's just normal life for them. So it's giving, especially you've got Dubai kids, right? Because it's very easy in this affluent environment with so much opportunity for kids where, let's face it, so much is done for them, right? So many kids have nannies and maids and so on. They don't need to be as independent as maybe you or I did growing up, or a lot of parents.
I can give a good example of that. It's a friend of mine, Justin, I spoke on his podcast, and he told me that day his daughter had complained to the nanny that she had been served the wrong breakfast, and he had to remind her that most people have to make their own breakfast. I thought that was a very Dubai statement.
Yeah. There's a whole list. I saw a funny video. There's a whole list of Dubai kids' problems, but that's a great example. And I think that the most important thing is you try and keep your kids grounded, and it's really difficult because all the things that you didn't have are probably the reason you're successful, right? And then you develop and you grow and you might have success in your business, your career, whatever it is, and your kids now live in Dubai and they've got access to all this stuff, and you want to give them everything, but by giving them everything, you take away everything, right? They don't have the grit or the resilience, and so the hardest job, but the most important job for a Dubai parent is to keep your children grounded and teach them gratitude and help them build resilience and that grit, because otherwise you're going to have a huge headache later on.
You experiencing those things in the slums, have you found that can only give you a lot of perspective, I imagine, in life, and a massive kind of wake up call? If you ever even I see that here in Dubai, if I'm having a shitty day, I look out the window and there's a worker on a construction site getting paid nothing, and then it's 1,000,000 degrees outside. I'm like, the problem's not that bad.
Yeah. I think perspective is one of those things you really gain from doing charity work. I think, but then again, like I said to the patrons when they visited Kenya, I said, you're going to leave here. It's going to be difficult to process because you're going to go from one of the poorest areas on the planet to wherever you live, back in London or Dubai or Singapore or whatever. And it's going to feel like a massive culture shock, like a reverse culture shock. You get home and you'll be like, God, this is crazy. And it's even harder if you've got kids. I went home and I kind of, after doing several of these trips, India, Africa, Asia, I started resenting some of the little moments of entitlement you might see from just a normal situation with kids, right? Not saying thank you for something, or not being super grateful for something they might have got. And I realized that it's not their fault. It's actually my fault for going and having a completely different perspective. Charity gives you perspective, and you've got to learn how to process it. I think that the two things you need if you're trying to make an impact in the world and develop a big charity is you need a big heart, because you've got to have the empathy to really understand the problems and to actually start in the first place. But you need thick skin. You've got to have tough skin, because you've got to be the one processing it all the time. You've got to be saying no to a lot of people who want more and more, because the problems you just unravel after layer that doesn't seem to go away. And you have to go home with all this new perspective. And one of the things I said to the patrons when they went home after Kenya is perspective is basically useless without implementation. You have to go home and do something about it. There's no point in going to the biggest slums on the planet, going home and saying, I feel great. I've got so much more gratitude now and perspective, and this has really benefited my life. It's arguably selfish. Instead, go home and try and inspire those around you to do something similar, even if it's not the same place, or even if it is the same place, encouraging them to see things in a different way. So for me, perspective is useless without implementation.
I think one thing most people don't do is they just don't take enough action generally with things.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of a fear thing holding them back. So I'm going to be having my first child in October. What you mentioned, and I've had a few people say this to me, that when you have a child that you two camps. One are like, oh, you won't be able to do anything you want to do anymore, your life's kind of over and your business is going to struggle. The other one, you can make way more money.
Yeah.
You were kind of insinuating that you have been more successful every time you've had a child. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I was speaking to a friend of mine. He's from the UAE, and he said to me that they've got an amazing saying here, which is, and I obviously can't remember it in Arabic, but he said to me it was along the lines of, every child brings new wealth to the family. And I said that earlier, and it's not necessarily financial wealth, right? It's a wealth of perspective, a wealth of development. And when you have kids, you are signing up to the world's best self-development course. You are in this unique, do you having a girl or a boy?
A girl.
A girl. Okay, cool. When you have a child, you're in this unique position of learning so much about yourself in the shortest amount of time possible. People would spend an absolute fortune on a self-development course to go through this, right? And if you're open-minded and you're willing to learn about yourself and the things that might trigger you, and you learn so much about your childhood, your personality, your character, your history, and your future by raising a child, that it's one of the greatest tools for self-development that you can have. As a result of that, you have this purpose energy, right? As soon as you found out you were going to have your daughter, how did you feel?
Excited, but then also reinforce that kind of purpose, because I don't know if you've had this through your career. I've not was drifting, I was working really hard, but I just was like, what am I kind of doing this for at this point? I can kind of do what I want anyway now. So it reignited a bit more of a purpose to me, like, okay, this is kind of why I'm doing it.
You go from having all these distractions to having one vision.
Yeah.
It's like, this is what I need to do now, right? When you have kids, you stop living for yourself. You start living unselfishly. You go from self-serving to what I think is one of the biggest fuels, especially for a guy, is finding fulfillment through service to others. And when it's your own family, it's this like powerful driving force. When I look at when I first found out I was going to have a daughter, I wasn't ready at all. I remember I was sitting there, I was stressed. There were 3 of us on the team, me, my wife, and another instructor called Matt, who's still with us today. We had a few hundred students. We were all maxed out in our roles. And she was my girlfriend at the time, Vicky. She came to me and she said, "I'm pregnant." And I was so shocked. I was, obviously very happy, and I was like, right. And I immediately went into action mode, like, how am I going to do this? What am I going to do? We had to gradually shut down some clubs in order so that she could step away for a bit. She worked right up until she gave birth. A month later, she started working again. When you're self-employed, you just don't have the luxury of, paternity leave or whatever, maternity leave. So it was a huge shock. I feel like as a society in general, we've got a kind of incorrect way of looking at pressure, right? Pressure is this incredibly important thing. It's a really valuable thing. And it's got a bad rap, right? People look at it as a bad, negative thing. Pressure is your tool for developing and accelerating your own development. When you find out you're a dad and when your child is born, suddenly you feel this enormous pressure, not just to survive, but to provide everything for this child, to thrive, right? And so that pressure trickles into everything in your life. And for a lot of people, they embrace that and they accelerate so quickly because of it. They didn't realize how many extra hours were in the day. One of the things that I find when you have a newborn is you just sleep so much less and you've still got to operate. And you realize actually you can do everything you were doing on 4 hours sleep. And it's a brutal reality. And of course, the idea is that you have as much sleep as you can get. But it's just an example of how much more we can actually take and how much further we can actually go. And I think exactly that purpose energy really, really drives us as providers in the family.
It's interesting you mentioned pressure gets a negative rap, because one of the things I probably unconsciously do is I will put pressure on myself to make myself perform, because I know that I perform well under pressure.
Yeah.
And I also find that I get bored if there's no pressure. So I try and force my hand by maybe setting bigger goals or trying to collapse time frames a bit where it's a bit maybe over the top to try and make myself take quicker action, which is why I mentioned earlier in this that I do things very quickly. I then have to make sure that's also on the right things.
Yeah. I mean, I think that shows a good depth of understanding of yourself, right? There's some decent introspective work that's gone into that to understand that you actually create a lifestyle around you that forces you to experience more pressure and to handle that properly. Some pressure you put into your own life. Sometimes pressure just comes and you've got to deal with it. I remember COVID, literally 2020 taking everything we had. Business was flying up until COVID, and then bang, lost everything. My wife was 8 months pregnant with our second child, lockdown, lost the whole business, 0 income at all. And I remember thinking, what am I going to do? And that was probably one of the moments in my life where I experienced the most pressure.
And you had the business here and then also in the UK?
Yeah, so we had to go through COVID twice. So lockdowns here and then lockdowns over there. I started a new business online at the time, a social media organization that went to 6 figures, did really well. But that first moment, that first kind of month, trying to figure out what I was going to do while my wife was about to give birth, was extreme pressure. It wasn't the kind of phase we wanted just when we were about to have our second child, right? But I remember sitting there and thinking, and just writing down on a piece of paper everything that can go wrong, and really meditating on that kind of concept that this is the worst case scenario. I'm going to lose everything, not just financially, but health, everything, right? Write it all on a piece of paper and fully accept that this is my reality. And then write down another piece of paper, everything I would do if that happened. So now I've got the worst case scenario and a practical plan of what to do. And then I turn the piece of paper over and I write down everything that can go right. And I remember, taking that piece of paper, everything that can go wrong, sticking it in a drawer and saying, now I know what to do. I'm completely okay with the worst case scenario. And that kind of made me think about base jumping days. We would jump off a cliff and do, wingsuit off a cliff, 100 miles an hour through waterfalls. And you'd be doing a cliff jump that someone died doing yesterday, right? And it's like the most brutal extreme sport you can imagine. It's beautiful, but it's also devastating. It's also a very selfish sport. I can't do that now, I've got kids. But the reality there is you have to accept the worst case scenario or you'll never jump. And so the same thing with business, and this is how I approach risk-taking and fear, is fully accepting the fear. And so many warrior cultures have done this throughout, if you look at the Bushido code, you look at some of the samurai cultures, you look at the Viking culture, they would literally meditate on the worst case scenario and fully accept that, which for them at war was death, right? Now, if you look at it from a business point of view, you're probably not going to die, but you can still take that knowledge and that process, meditate on the worst case scenario, park it, and then fully immerse yourself on the positive and what could go right. And that's what we did in COVID. And I think that extreme pressure and handling it with some of those methods just really, really helped.
Is that still the same kind of methodology you use now to manage pressure and challenges in the business?
Yeah, definitely. I think as the business grows and develops, I feel like, we've got close to 100 staff in a physical business. I feel so much responsibility that one foolish, big, risky move now for me could cost livelihoods. We're literally feeding close to 100 families, right? So, there's an element there where it's like, I feel such a weight of responsibility that it actually becomes harder to make a big risky move. I can't put everything on black, right? It's not just me at home and I can just, if it does in my 20s, if it goes wrong, I'll just move back in with mum and dad sort of thing. You don't have that, right? I've got my own family to feed plus responsibility of everyone else's. So for me personally, as the business has grown and developed, I've created buffers in my life, right? We need a massive war chest financial buffer in case we have dips in the business, financially, economically, whatever it is. We need team buffers. We have this saying of team first, right? So we might slightly overstaff so that no one's massively stretched. If someone dips for whatever reason, we're able to jump back in and support them. So I think you basically, a lot of what I do now, I see as kind of building moats around what we've got. And, building moats around financial compliance or HR compliance and all this kind of boring stuff, which isn't as exciting, especially if you're a starter. But as your business grows and develops, you start to just build more and more security, right? You upgrade your castle from made out of wood to made out of concrete.
With that instead, in terms of how do you manage your day now as well, running the business? Like, you have 3 kids, you also do extreme sports, you go skiing in Jordan, all over the place. How do you balance the business, but then also, you doing the stuff you want, but also stuff like spending time with family? Because I know that's a thing that a lot of the audience who either have children or want to have children, like myself, are like, you seem prime candidate if someone does this phenomenally well.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that you learn to let go and build a team around you. Have an amazing assistant early on. Get an assistant early on. Get a really good one early on. One of the best investments I made was a driver. I've had a driver now for about 5 years. Whenever we've got a van, I jump in the van with Wi-Fi, jump in the back, put my feet up, get the laptop out and just do work. So I'm doing 10 hours of office work in the car. So as a dad, I don't go home and then have to get the laptop open and not see the kids. I do that in the car. So a lot of my work's in the car.
Do you pick the kids up in the van and you're working on the way there then?
They're not in the car when I'm in the car normally. So my wife does the school run. She picks them up. But then I'll plan my training when the kids are at school, right? So I train about 15 hours a week right now. And that's swimming, running, cycling, it's lifting weights, it's all sorts, right?
In terms of you moving from the UK to Dubai, was the business the sole decision in terms of why you did that, or would you ever move back to the UK, do you think?
I think when you become an expat, you start to realize how many places in the world you could live. I think my dream is not necessarily to live in one place, but to live in several places. I look at the way we live right now, and it's really difficult to live away from England because obviously family are there, and you feel kind of guilty because, especially when you got kids, because you'd wish that they could see their grandparents more. But then you're kind of torn because life's so good in Dubai, and there's more opportunity here for a business and so on. We originally moved to Dubai for the business, but then we realized how brilliant it is to kind of raise a family, how safe it is. It's got lots of traditional values that maybe people don't see online, but we really enjoy. But then again, we spend a lot of time abroad. So we tend to do a month in Thailand every year. We go on quite a lot of ski trips. So we're in the mountains a lot, which is important for me. We spend 2 months in the Mediterranean in the summer. So I've tried to design our life around where we love spending time. Living in a little villa in Thailand on the beach is such a different pace of life to being here in Dubai, right? I wake up in the morning, stick the kids in a motorbike and drive them into the jungle, and we see elephants and monkeys and snakes, come down, have breakfast with an amazing view of the beach. And you just, you go to the markets and buy food and make food and all this sort of stuff. And it's such a different way of life. So they get to experience that. And then obviously the summer, it's really key for me to escape the summer, just mostly because of the air pollution, right? So especially with little kids, I try and get them out, and we go somewhere, like we spent 2 months in Greece, where every day they were swimming, they're at the beach. We found holiday camps for them there, 10 to 12 hours every single day outside. They couldn't do that here, right? So yeah, for me, it's about lifestyle design. Where do you want to live in the world, rather than just choosing one place? I think as someone who's an expat, you can literally live anywhere.
Is there anywhere else you would consider relocating to outside of the UAE if your business wasn't here, for example?
My business wasn't here.
You go anywhere?
Yeah, so I mean, we love Italy. We got married in Italy.
Okay.
Italy's got great skiing, great culture, great food. I speak a bit of Italian, not very well, but enough to kind of be sociable. I feel like that's a country that means a lot to us. But then again, you might just fall in love with a country, and for some reason it pulls you towards that country, right? I feel like Greece, we're now spending next summer in Greece as well because we love this so much. So I'd probably say the Mediterranean. But again, I wouldn't spend all my life in one country. There's just, I don't want to be in Greece in the winter. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't want to be in Italy in the winter unless I'm skiing. So I guess the world just feels like a very small place after being in Dubai. It just feels like we can be anywhere. Why would we choose just one place?
Do you ever find, in some respects, Dubai ruins the rest of the world with certain things because you get used to certain things? Like, even I was in the US 2 weeks ago, and it took an hour to get my bags off the plane.
Yeah.
I land back in Dubai and it's 30 seconds, bag off.
Yeah. Dubai is so efficient, especially at the airports. I think Dubai makes traveling so easy. It's this amazing this amazing hub for traveling, right? So for me, yeah, when it comes to customer service as well, you've probably noticed that, right? Like a waiter at a restaurant in Dubai versus maybe a waiter in a restaurant in Italy is probably, or England, is going to treat you quite differently. There's such a standard here, and people expect that standard. So it's a bit of a culture shock for them to go, which makes it interesting when you got kids and they're used to going to hotels for a staycation or whatever in Dubai, and you take them abroad, they see a whole different, life. And so I think my kids are quite used to that because we travel quite a bit and we stay lots of different places. But yeah, I think there is a big shock for people when they do start traveling around the world.
Do you think Dubai is the best place in the world to bring up children?
I think Dubai is a very safe place to bring up kids, which I really like, right? I think that's so important. there's no perfect place to bring up kids, though. I feel like if you raise kids here, you face different challenges. You know, your kids probably won't be streetwise. They're probably more likely to be victims of crime when they go abroad because they won't be used to it. You know, but they'll benefit massively by understanding different cultures, by having a level of respect and, you know, having, I would say, a deeper understanding of the world, because they're in a place where there's so much diversity. That safety really helps. I think, you know, you're growing kids in an area where there is still these traditional values, which I feel like a lot of the world is kind of losing. So yeah, there's pros and cons, right? But for me, this is easily one of the best places. Yeah.
If there was a younger version of Sebastian Bates who's watching or listening to this, what would be the best piece of advice you'd give them if they're in their early 20s?
Early 20s, based on where I was in my early 20s. My early 20s were wild, so I was on such an adventure. I wouldn't want to say anything to change the course and direction of my life, right? Like I feel like anything I would say might potentially change where I am now, and I like where I am now. But I would probably say to zoom out and look at entrepreneurship like a career. Because it's very easy as an entrepreneur to feel like you're doing these sprints, and then I've made it, and then I'll be happy, and then I do a sprint, and then I've made it, and then I'm happy, and then you want the next thing, and the goalposts continuously move. But I found so much peace in my life when I realized, I think after COVID as well, where I realized that like my iron was kind of tested, my metal was tested in that moment, right? That I realized I wasn't just going to do this for a short amount of time, that this was my life, that I was an entrepreneur, and I'm probably going to do this until my 80s. And I think when you view your life like that, and you view entrepreneurship like a career, there's a lot less pressure on doing things short term. And actually you start building things that stand the test of time. You really start focusing on developing assets and relationships and developing trust and building trust, and investing in who you are as an entrepreneur. So yeah, I would say zoom out, treat this like a career. And that mindset also helps you with the bumps in the road, right? Like, you know, if I learned that lesson before COVID hit, I would have had more peace during that dip and understood it's meant to be like this. Things get better, right? So that's how I'd say it. Perspective.
Part of the process.
Part of the process, yeah. And part of the adventure, right? Like, you didn't sign up to become an entrepreneur because you just wanted so much stability. If you're in this game, you're the sort of person who, you know, you wanted an adventure more than anything. And, you know, I think one of my biggest goals in life is just not to have a boring life, to have an exciting life. It's not to look back, you know, and be a billionaire and look back and be like, oh, you know, look at all this money you've made. That's not the way I see it. You know, I look at entrepreneurship like entrepreneurship for me is really exploring all of the gifts I could possibly give to the world and reaching my full potential with that. And I think a really good day as an entrepreneur is where your battery's totally empty, but you feel full.
I think that's a beautiful place to finish. Where's the best place for people to find out more about you, foundations, all that type of stuff?
So if you've got kids in Dubai, then warrioracademy.ae. We've got lots of clubs around here for kids to develop your character. To find out about me, just find me on Instagram, Seb.Bates. If you are interested in going on a life-changing 3-year journey with us, where we'll literally change the way you look at, you know, your life and the world and your place within it as an entrepreneur, then we've got the Patreon program, which is a 3-year journey where we take people to Kenya, India, Nepal. We will show you where we're making an impact. You'll be getting access to our business mastermind with some incredible people from around the world as well. So you can find out about that by going to thebatesfoundation.com.
Awesome. Big thanks for your time. Make sure you check all of those out. If you enjoyed the podcast, make sure you subscribe, share it with a friend, and we'll see you next episode very soon.